So it begins to then form what's the thing that forms around the caterpillar? Thank you. And does anybody know what happens inside that chrysalis? Liquefies. Totally breaks down. Its cells melt. It melts. It becomes caterpillar soup. So you tell me how it's possible to then take that melted soup into a butterfly. There is an incredible process that none of us can understand, but that we know exists. We know in our hearts, we know in our the deepest reserves of our mind, that there's some power, there's some intelligence, however you want to define that. But it's amazing, isn't it? And then the caterpillar serves as this great metaphor for what we are, which is this birth of genius, this generation of genius. And genius does not have to be something extraordinary or intellectually smart. Rather, it's fully embodying the ordinary with extraordinary love. And then people's life stories, whether it's their physical challenges, their mental challenges, their emotional challenges, or the tragedies they've been through in life, somehow in this process, and this does not take away from the pain that exists, but rather this creates a container in which that suffering can now transmute into something else. But it doesn't take away from the suffering. It just makes it possible so that that suffering is birthed to something new. And then the butterfly's free, and they migrate. They'll migrate from Mexico all the way up to the New England, just flying along. Isn't that amazing? So these are two powerful metaphors, and metaphors are incredible teachers for us. So we're meant to thrive. We're meant to grow. We're meant to be fully ourselves. And that process of unbecoming ourselves is the beginning of the breakdown. So tell me, let's break away from that for a moment. I've shared with you my perspective that health and wellness are your state of your natural state. Tell me what health and well-being mean to you. What are some words that you would describe when you feel really well, when you feel really alive?
Strong.
Strong. Good. I love that. Good one.
Vital.
Vital. Excellent.
Fluid.
Fluid. Perfect.
Clear.
Who said that?
Clear.
Katie Warren in the back. Good job. Anybody?
Balanced.
Balanced. What else?
Joyful.
Joyful. Perfect. Did someone say greedy?
I said free.
Free. Good. Gordon Gekko, if you remember. That's it. These are the watchwords of well-being. Isn't it funny that none of you, I guess what you said could be wrapped in with physical stuff, but nobody said anything about physical stuff. Isn't that funny? How do you feel physically when you feel really well? Energized. Light. What else?
Lack of attention on yourself.
Isn't that interesting? That is so deep. Lack of attention on yourself. Let's run with that for a minute. Is that Milena? Hey! Nice to see you. Let's go back to tennis ball, Winnebago, and Utah. That story could go so many directions. You're in the middle of Utah, you don't know where you are, you've just come out of a Winnebago, and you have to look for a tennis ball. And then that tennis ball is the world's biggest diamond. So this is interesting. When we're stressed and we're not feeling these things, people's attention narrows in and becomes very focused on self. That's it. We become very self-focused. Naturally, it's part of our evolution. It's part of how we survived. It's part of how we've evolved to be where we are here. But it doesn't help us thrive. So, Winnebago, tennis ball. So, we're going to step into the world of quantum physics right now. Now, turn to the person next to you and say, I'm totally a genius. For real. Okay. This is not complicated. This is not complicated. And if it is, if I don't explain it well, which is quite possible, just ask me a question. You say, hey, I don't understand. So here's the cool thing about quantum physics. Is that it begins historically we had this model of the world where mind and body were separate, right? There was mind, there was body. That was thanks to the man Descartes. Don't have to get into it, don't have to worry about it. But there was this sort of belief that, well, what I think and what I feel is really relegated to the world of, at that time, the church. And that the body would be sort of relegated to the things of the earth and physicians. They're totally separate. Then this guy Newton came along, and as the story goes, he's sitting under a tree, and it was really bird poop, but they changed it because he didn't want to be embarrassed. But an apple hits his head, and he goes, aha, there's some funny force. Like, how does that happen? And he begins throwing stuff up in the air, and he says gravity. So then we had this, the really cool thermodynamics of gravity and the understanding of linear laws of Newtonian physics. Without Newtonian physics, there's no way you could have driven here tonight. You couldn't get on a plane. You couldn't fly to London, where that's amazing you were born there. I have this thing about British people. I love British people. And so then along came a very interesting fellow named Albert, who was told, by the way, when he was 4 years old, that he was stupid and would amount to nothing. Isn't that interesting, right? So as he goes along in his life, he starts to have this funny thought flood that everything E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the speed of light, thus telling us that everything, basically, matter and light are kind of the same thing. So you're light. You're made of light. You're made of intelligence. As it goes on, then quantum theory started to look at. Because we had this static understanding in chemistry that there was an atom that had a central piece to it and things floating around it. And you remember the little, we'd learn them where there'd be like the green circle, and then you plug in the red thing, or that would be the molecules, and then you had your chart of the electrons moving around. But the truth is, the tennis ball is the electron, and we're trying to find it, and it only shows up where we look for it. It only shows up where we look for it. So they begin to look for where the electron is, thinking it's some static thing, like it's just some coordinate, like Gastonia. You just look on the map and you go 85, and it's the up-and-coming place. Everybody loves Gastonia. It's a hub for tech and new development and less expensive housing than Mecklenburg County. So you just go there and you know it. But it wasn't that way. So wherever they would that's where it would show up. Isn't that fascinating? And when you changed the way you looked at it, it would change. So it was all observer dependent, meaning as we looked at something, not we as if I was partaking in the experience, but as the experimenters began to observe phenomenon, and then they changed the way they observed that phenomenon, the phenomenon changed. So to quote the late, great Wayne Dyer, when we change the way we look at things, the things that we look at change. Now here's why I'm bringing this up. Because Mr. Rick said we get really self-focused. And when we become really self-focused, we begin to fix all those electrons of our stress and our past and our beliefs and all the things we think aren't working, and we make them very solid. Does that make sense? We become less free. We become less attuned to this immense field of possibilities that is within us and around us all the time. We become more particle and less wave. Say, what? Everything is at once wave and everything is at once particle. And here's what I mean. Everything is at once substance and everything is at once pure energy. What percentage did I say an atom is of empty space? 99.99%. So that's the waves of possibility. That's another thing that's called the unified field. That the unified field is what everything births out of. And when we are in stress and we are in the emotions of stress, we very much orient our perspective and things become very solid. And our blinders go like this. That's maybe an overly complicated way to say that when we get stressed and we are conditioned by our past and we forget who we are, we become small and we become dense. Just to illustrate, Gay Hendricks, anybody know Gay Hendricks, the great psychologist? He said that when babies are born, they have approximately 4,000 ways their bodies can move. By the age, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something around the age of 10 and 11, we'd moved down to about 400 ways. By the time someone is 20, it's down to 40. And then, as we age, it just gets smaller and smaller. And I don't believe that that's natural aging process. Tissue, muscle, bone, it's all respondent to how we feel, how we eat, how we live. How do people who feel alive move? Do they stand and move differently than people who feel disconnected and stressed and without hope? And think that our world is now defined by, I was going to make a political comment. I won't, but you can just fill in your own political rant. But we become really small.